Okay, so first things first, this is part of the music recording. It's a special moment for you guys in the community out there. Go ahead and leave a comment below the video. Let me know you're watching. I'd love to say hi to everybody. And big shout out to Adam for just everything that you guys have been putting on in the community, all the mentors out there. You guys are doing amazing things right now. And today is just, I want to give back to the community and basically offer a free mastering session. Who doesn't want free mastering? I saw a few of you guys post in the comments below, so I'm going to go ahead and pick the winner. Just do 1 second. And of course we're not in. There we go. Hopefully you guys can hear me now. And now you can see me, right? Okay. So, let's see, we had a few comments. Let's go ahead and pick at random, randomizer. And congratulations, Andy Blomfelt. Hey, hit me up, send me a private message. Actually, let me just message you really quick. Andy, you won. Oh man, hopefully you're watching. All right, so let me just hop into a different view here really quick, folks. Go to screen share, sorry about that. And we're in my DAW really quick. Let me just see if we can get that track sent over. And while he's doing that, I'm going to get my session prepped and ready to rock. So if you notice, I already have a reference in here. It's one of my tracks from the past, just so I have something of reference there, commercially mastered. And I'm not going to like violate any copyright clearances for posting this on YouTube or Twitch or wherever. Twitch is starting to crack down more on copyright content for music, which is great news for content creators and music creators. Because let's face it, that's one of the places that people have just been, willy-nilly using whatever music they want and not paying a licensing fee. I just thought that was worth mentioning. Sucks for content creators because now they have to pay a license, but there are super cheap options out there for licensing. Even for more of like the more EDM type stuff that we might do, there's quite a few out there that do it on the cheap, which is pretty cool. So, in the meantime, let me just double check and say hi. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Andy. You're a champ. Let's go grab that really quick. Just download that. So while I'm waiting for this, I see. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the track? Maybe just message me here since we got a PM going. What I would love to know is who your idols are. If you had like 2 tracks you were to reference, or something you've listened to in the past, you feel like you would love to hear this track just kind of stack up next to either in a Spotify playlist or live on stage. And this is a pretty common thing that I do that I'll ask my clients is, one, who are your favorite artists, or who are you referencing when you're trying to get your stuff to sound similar to something? Because that gives me a good gauge in terms of like where you want this to head for a couple of things: loudness, tonal balance, and just overall vibe of the track. I want to make sure that I can get in the ballpark of that for you. I'm not just handing you back like, hey, here's what I think your song should sound like. It's all about what you want your song to sound like. So that's part of the process. And before I even dive into mastering, I'm going to show you guys my chain. Now, when I actually start processing it here in a second, you'll notice I actually do start with templates. And one thing that is really cool is the way that I've set up my project here to be able to quickly A/B between all sorts of things. And I'll show you guys, I'll walk you guys through this chain here in a minute. Let me just make sure I've got everything done. There we go. Open up a new project. Let's throw that there for a second. I'm going to save this as... Whoops. We are on. There we go. Neologic Studios. Sorry for the redundancy here, folks. So this is 2020 0620. What are you going by? No Fear No More. All right. I just have a super simple way of categorizing my tracks there. All right, so let's bring this guy in to mix. Bam. All right, and we're in. Cool. So, Andy just let me know it's an edit of a Madeon track. Love Madeon. So he kind of wants to start including it in his live sets. He's usually referencing Madeon, Porter Robinson, Wave Racer, Uppermost when I'm working with a track. Cool. So I'm pretty familiar with Madeon stuff. Porter Robinson is definitely definitely a top-notch name. I'm sure it's almost a household name for anybody who knows anything electronic. Very cool. Yeah, let's get started here. Okay, I want to just take a listen to the track. I'll show you guys. I'm gonna walk you through my process because for me, this is my first time getting acquainted with it. So first things first. Let me know if you guys can hear everything okay. Man, I'm digging this track. This is so awesome. All right, dude, that was sick. Man, I am digging this. All right, so let's take a listen. First, if you guys weren't catching what I was doing, I was basically listening to the track, but I was also quickly just placing some markers like verses, builds, drops, right after grabbing the tempo. And if you guys are curious, on Windows, there is a free app you can go get from analogx.com. That's this guy right here. AnalogX tap tempo. So I just use the space bar and I'm just trying to find the tempo of the track, and it's roughly, you know, like I'm guessing that's 104. So I typed in 104 and sure enough that's what I got. So this is pretty quick way of finding you know, something that I'm working on. It's also a good way of like just quickly identifying maybe milliseconds if I need to know what the tempo is in milliseconds. And I'm going to show you guys another trick once I get started with my chain here. That's pretty useful in mastering because I want to know things for attack and release timings. So there's a few things that I want to note out here. Your crest factor seems a little on the low side because the meat, the chunk of it's already so well mixed. I feel like there's not much work that I want to do to emphasize it. So I have a couple of chains I want to try. And let's see, one of them is, whoops. Let's start with something. Chain preset. I usually work off my old previous projects. Let's see. So this might be the kind of the confusing part, but this is how I get to working really quickly. I feel like this is a decent. Oh, it's empty, of course. Let's see. So here is one. Of course, I'm going to do a little bit of modification to it because I know the chain that I'm importing is kind of set up for a different track. Hopefully you guys didn't lose me. There we go. Okay, so let me go back to the beginning there. The very first thing that I do is just double check the loudness on the way in. And that's because I really don't need the over limit protection, because I noticed that the entire time that track didn't peak at anywhere above -1.9, and I feel like the meat of the track, you know, if I blow this up a little bit here, there aren't any crazy high peaks that I felt needed, you know, like limiting to kind of like control the amount of input going in. So I'll give me a second, I'll kind of explain what I'm talking about there. And if anybody has any questions at any time, either just comment in below the video and I'll try to get back to you guys. I can kind of see it on another screen over here. But yeah, feel free to drop your questions. Let me know if you guys are stuck on anything that I'm talking about here. So let me dive back in. So what I did is I first imported the track, and now you see I have all my tempo is set up so I know what the tempo or the BPM of the song is. I got some basic markers for song arrangement here just to give me an idea of where things are in the track that maybe I want to pay attention to, because there are things in the mastering phase that I can automate to kind of emphasize the story of the song. And that's a really good thing that I like to do, is just have those guidelines in place. And then just looking at the track here, so I'll walk you through the signal flow. I have tracks set up here. All these mix tracks are set up to route directly to something called mastering chain send. And then basically I just have these auxiliary tracks here. All three are just receiving the input from the same stereo send. So basically I'm just doing three-way parallel returns. So if you think of signal flow in this term, you know, this is something you guys can think about. Just thinking about signal flow in general, if you guys are pretty familiar with your DAW, you should be able to mimic this chain or this project setup to be able to master your own tracks this way as well. And you can follow this for mixing you guys. This is pretty common stuff. There we go. Don't know why it keeps defaulting to that, sorry. So, yeah, these are all, and these are just muted by default. And then the output of these chains is going to the master bus here. So let me just kind of show you guys a cool trick. I imported that reference, right? So at any time, you'll see I have two buses, master and preview, and both of them are going to the same hardware output in my interface. But this allows me to quickly bypass anything that I want to see, or maybe if I have any processing on the master bus, which typically it's just analyzers, you know, like looking at signal and things like that. But if I just hit play really quick, let me A/B between these two, and I'll show you what's happening here. Very cool. So if you notice in the corner, that just maybe it's hard to see on the screen, but there's a red dot in the corner here on either one. So I've created what's called a group, and I can set up all sorts of groups. And the way that this group works, as soon as I click on something, it alternates the state of whatever's in that group, or toggles it. So I started with one in mute and then set them both to the same group. So now anytime I toggle one, it triggers the other as well. And I can set up the same up here for like my tracks and stuff. So I can set up B and B here. I can set up my chains that way, the same way. So I can do C and C. Now, anytime I toggle between these two, let's go ahead and take a listen here. I'm going to import another preset, and from the same project, I believe. Let's do, hopefully that loads. I don't want to crash. It's been a while since I used that. It was last year, if you guys didn't notice that. Okay, so it looks like it loaded. Perfect. And of course. All right, so this is the way that I like to work. It quickly gives me an idea of being able to move between different, you know, sets of mastering chains that I've already created very quickly. I can do that again with chain C if I want to import another preset or start building one from scratch. I feel like these both give me a good ballpark, but there's two very different things happening that I want to point out. So let me walk you guys through what is happening here with this first chain. And I call this the pitch and catch method. This is what I've been doing for a long time now. It's taken me years to hone in on this this particular style of what I do, and especially for electronic music, it's more of like that broadcast style, compressing, you know, over limiting, kind of just that very wall of sound in your face, you know, vibe. But it sounds very pleasant and it sounds like it's working very well on this track. And so everything that I'm doing to manipulate this chain from this point forward is just massaging gain staging and then tonal balance. So if you notice, my very first stage here is the REQ. And typically what I find is there's a lot of harsh frequencies, especially when you're dealing with a lot of sample heavy music. A lot of samples are already mixed to within an inch of their life. They're already balanced for loudness, so they sound impressive on their own, but then in a mix, they tend to be overbearing. So when it comes to mastering things to get them even louder, I'm trying to just nip it in the bud a little early on. You know, very first thing is I'm just doing a little subtle dip. You can see it's a negative 1.6, just a 1.5 dB cut right around 7K. And then from there, I am feeding it into a compressor. So if you guys can see what's happening here, it's a very high ratio, but it's also working with a very quick attack and release. And then there's something called PDR. So think of this kind of like the way that RMS evaluation works. It's very subtle. You're not really going to notice it, especially because I have the reference set to low, meaning like the way that the output, the makeup gain on this compressor is going to work is if I want to peak reference, it's going to push the output higher based on the compression that it's doing. And then this way it's going to keep it just based off of the lowest reference, meaning like the ceiling that I'm working off of, the threshold. So the next stage going into this guy here is the Lin MB, and this is where the bulk of my, it's doing two things at once. It's doing tonal shaping, but it's also doing compression. And compression, you notice there is no ratio setting anywhere in this plugin, and that's because the ratio is basically program dependent. The more that you're pushing into it, the more higher the ratio is going to get. So it's kind of like an 1176 in that regard. But you'll notice I have things like threshold, gain, and then range. You can tell it that there's a limit to how much compression you want to apply, how much dB of gain reduction you want it to do. And that's what this range characteristic is for. So if I were to move this, you can see that that blue that blue space, that range is telling you how much compression it's going to apply in total. And then you'll be able to see it react to the signal as it squashes that signal within that band. The other thing that I play with is the attack and release times. You notice right now it's set to ARC, which is automatic release character. But if I set it to manual, that's where you start to see these numbers come into play. And so I'm going to play the track, and I'm going to open up my next tool. So if anybody has any questions at this point, let me know, because this is I'm diving into some pretty advanced stuff here. If you notice, I was tweaking my attack settings based on, I like to do just a good starting point. So keep doing that. Good starting point is to just figure out what the tempo of the track is, and I work in the musical grid. And for the attack and release times, you'll notice I went the inverse of certain, I went the opposite direction with the attack. I went really kind of moderate attack, slower attack for the low end, and then worked my way to a really fast attack time, because higher frequencies obviously modulate a lot faster. I need to be able to compress them down a lot faster. So we're talking about 4.5 milliseconds versus 72 milliseconds. And if you notice here in the delay time calculator, this is another free tool called delay time calculator from Analog X. So get it at analogx.com. You can get this for free. It's just super nifty, very helpful plugin. Again, only for Windows, unfortunately. I'm sure you guys can find something like this for Mac. But the very cool thing here is you guys will notice that the opposite direction here for the release times, and I have it set to manual. So I want to be able to have a faster release so that way I can keep the sustain level higher as it gets back to a normal range. As it crosses back the threshold, it should come back up sooner. And then as we go up the frequency range, I kind of want it to take its time getting back up. Now what this does is this kind of gives that pumping perception from the high end of the track to the low end of the track. So the high end is kind of taking its time, letting go of the signal to come back up to the original level after it passes the threshold back below the threshold. So that gives more precedence to the low end. Basically what I'm saying is the low end's allowed to stay louder for longer, and then you have kind of like this time where it swoops back up on the high end. And that kind of helps emphasize that pumping compression. Now I could do the opposite. I can throw these numbers in the opposite direction. Everything on the release I can put on the attack, and everything on the attack I can put on release. And you'd have the opposite effect where you get more of a crunchy, clippy, very crisp sounding track that kind of downplays the bottom end, but it's still tight and controlled because of the fact that we're using a linear phase multiband compressor. So this is stage one of what I call the pitch and catch method. The very next one is we're doing a little bit of tonal shaping with the Pug Child here. And if you notice, let me go ahead and play it really quick. At no point is it doing really more than 1 dB of gain reduction. I'm really just trying to play with those peaks, and based on my attack timing, so this is the time constant one, it's really just kind of working very subtly and kind of creating a character to that crest, meaning it's affecting that transient kind of in the same way that you would expect like a tape emulator to do its job. And then out of that one, we're going to the SSL G channel. And I'm really just using it for the EQ. I'm not really using it for the compression and to give more of their analog modeled flavors. So this is all analog emulation stuff. I love the sound that it gets because it definitely, it provides that result that we're hearing right now. The next step. There we go. So I felt like that just had a little too much pressure. We were losing some of the impact for the drums. So now the bass feels like, especially the kick. The sub on that kick definitely comes back when I do that. I gave a little bit more headroom, and then we're going to go into the Izotope EQ, which I don't really think I need for this track. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And let's see what's happening here. Yeah, that's pretty bumpy. Don't feel like okay. Now, a typical one is the L2. I'm going to play with this because I've actually started using a couple of different ones. I love Elevate. And I do two things. I do Elevate. And I've been back and forth between Pro L2 and the Waves, or no, sorry, the Izotope Maximizer. I think they have a space. There we go. Okay. So let's call up Newfangled Elevate, and I forget if I have any presets that I was using. I think I was starting with something like, I love the sound of what these guys have done clipping. right, so is anybody lost? Does anybody have any questions about what I'm doing here? I'm just trying to optimize this chain. I'm kind of just, like I said, going through gain staging certain things. I'm just trying to rough it in really quick. You'll notice I just put my ceiling down to negative 0.1 dB true peak because true peak limiting is on. Now, let me talk about this for a moment because true peak is something very different from just saying, hey, look at our ceiling. We're outputting at negative 1 dB, right? In the digital domain, which is what we're talking about, because audio isn't reconstructed for our ears to hear yet until it reaches a speaker, right? Digital can look like, it's completely clipped off. Let me just zoom in here and I'll show you. So let's say in digital, right, we look at these peaks. Get that out of the way. Let's just say we were looking at a nice fat thing like that, right? That's just crazy brick walled. And those are just, those peaks are crushed, right? There is no information beyond what we are seeing here. That looks like clipping, right? However, what happens as it goes through a converter, a digital to analog converter, when you're already at the ceiling of what that digital file is describing as 0 dB full scale, meaning 0 dB in digital, you can have that vector, meaning that trajectory, how sharp that transient's trying to become, actually tell the converter, oh, hey, I might need more voltage than that, and it's going to try to go over than that. But the problem with that is, in voltage terms, in pure electronics terms, the electrical signal cannot get any louder than that. So then the converter itself clips. And what you end up with is nasty distortion. Doesn't sound pleasant. And then everybody's unhappy. So that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is when we go to basically create a file, a master file that we want to hand over to a distributor, somebody like DistroKid or TuneCore, CD Baby, any one of those services. What they're going to do is take your file and then make sure that all of the outlets are given the version they need. So let's say I have this project, it's at 96K 24-bit. So you hand that to DistroKid. DistroKid says they can handle that. Well, guess what? Spotify doesn't accept that. There are very few services that are going to accept that. There are some that'll accept 4824, 4424. The standard for most places is 4416. So if that's the lowest common denominator, let's just go with that. And you won't be considered hi-fi if you're trying to push the title, if you can get on there. But at the very least, you have complete control over the sound of your master. And here's why. Because anytime you hand them your file, your master file, if it's the highest resolution file, 9624, whatever, on the mastering process, I am applying dither. Now, dither is applying a noise shaping, sound in the very background of the signal. It's very low. But where it matters most is when you look at this tail here, where something should be 0 or just silent, right? That helps, but what's going to happen is if they apply any sort of processing after the fact, meaning that they have to take your project file and convert it, they have to apply their own sample rate conversion and bit depth, change, whether it's a reduction or something to get up. Heaven forbid they should have to go from 16 to 24. Nobody really does that, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. However, the issue is that anytime that they are doing that, they are going to change your signal. And so the things that we care about, notice the spurious peak out of nowhere, this is what can happen to your signal. This is what can happen to your final master when they go and further manipulate it with sample rate converters and bit depth changes, because they might be applying dither as well. And that noise is going to reintroduce or change the peaks, the relationship of those peaks to the peak of the signal. And so just on that fact alone, you can introduce another clipping stage because it might clip in that conversion process. And the very last thing is you want to make sure you have a little headroom for those lossy compression formats like MP3, OGG. When they're converting it to a compressed streaming format that allows them to just push it out to millions and millions of listeners, they have to make that file very tiny. And the way they do that is through lossy compression, meaning that lossy compression is looking at the data of the signal. So here's what happens with typical, codecs, as they call them. So if you want to convert to MP3 or convert to AAC or convert to OGG, what's going to happen is it's going to have a filter stage 2, and it's going to break up your signal, your master file, into 128 or 256 bands, and then it's going to apply a codec, or basically analyze an algorithm of the signal to try to find what common information exists and throw out all of the unnecessary information, the repetitive stuff. It's literally throwing out data and just keeping what's important. Typically that data is in the form of partials or overtones or things like that that maybe our ears can't really easily discern until you get to like really, really low, streaming depths, like 128 kilobits per second or lower, like 96. It sounds really watery, sounds really nasty, and you tend to lose bass and you tend to lose high end. It just doesn't sound clear, right? So those things also affect your signal. They're going to play with the peaks, and you can have as much as a 6 dB jump in a transient or a peak just from that process alone. Think about it. It's chopping up your frequency spectrum into 256 little bands, and then it's applying its own filtering to there, and it's throwing out little bits of information out of each of those 256 bands. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on after the fact if we want all these different formats, and mastering is a game of inches. It's a game of millimeters even. So the fact that I'm even attempting to just say, hey, negative 0.1 dB on the output of this here is just insane. And anytime you're going to do that, if that were to be the exact way that they go and convert that to an MP3, you're definitely going to end up with clipping distortion in the process. And the other thing is the fact that when it does clip like that, for streaming services, they want to have it lower. So negative 2 dB true peak is, I think, what Spotify is advising right now. So that means that maybe your distribution, your DSP, might be converting that, but they might be applying a gain reduction. Now, typically that doesn't warrant any changes. Like, they're not modifying the signal. All they're doing is adjusting the gain of the entire thing to become compliant with Spotify. But again, if you're having to do that plus SRC plus bit depth changes, things like that, where you have to introduce dither, if we've already applied dither on the master, that's it's 2 dithers now. You're just basically raising your noise floor even higher. So there's a lot of little things that I try to pay attention to that happen way after the fact, way after I have touched it. And so even just looking here, those are the things that I am trying to start to optimize. I'm thinking about while I'm optimizing this gain staging stuff. So let's dive back into this track here. And again, if you guys have any questions at all, Andy, let me know. I know you were asking about my process and everything. If you have any questions, feel free to comment in the video, the live stream feed, and I will try to see it as soon as I can. Speaking of, let me double check. Alrighty, so let me go ahead and start optimizing chain B, because I'm going to give you guys 2. I'm going to give you 2, Andy, and you can pick which one you like better. So let's go into the next one here. All right, because I went and changed that. Back at the beginning. Okay. So let's just work from the drop here. I am just going to set my loop points. So I don't know if you guys can see that. As soon as I move the thickness and saturation, you can see some of the second bumps here over the fundamental, meaning that sub range start to just raise right up. And so what I'm doing is trying to emphasize that second or third order harmonic, which is just kind of giving that warmth. So that's sounding pretty good. I don't want to fatigue my ears too much. I'm going to try to rush through this as best I can. So we're almost there. I think we just want one more spot. Let's do Ozone 9 Max. So the reason I do this one is because I just want to do a little bit more transient control. So I'm going to set it to transient there. Let's kind of want to give the sustain a little more stereo independence, but I do want to boost. The other thing is, let's look at loudness meter. Normally I use this one. I like it a little more than the TC Electronic. TC Electronic is pretty cool. I'm just used to seeing the Uline one. Okay, so. Now that's pretty good. We're actually got it pretty hot. And that's just on the hottest, you know, I'm playing the loudest part of the song on purpose because I want the mastering chain to kind of do what I need it to do there. And so from here on out, I'm kind of just going to show you guys some of the tricks that I do, that I like to use up my sleeve to kind of help move the track, make it just kind of more dynamic. Because obviously we are crushing the crap out of this thing. We're hitting negative 8.5 lefts. It's really loud. Your momentary max is -7 during this last section, the drop 2 here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to turn that loop off. Let's play it from the beginning. I'm going to let this kind of just look, you know, do its thing in the background. like those. Okay, that wasn't verse 1. That was that was basically a pre-drop. That was a intro drop, and we're gonna call this verse 1. Very cool. So I really like that stereo. If you guys notice, and let me know if you like this, Andy, because I feel like this just, it helps boost, gives a little bit more emphasis to these different parts of the song. So I'm gonna go back, play this intro again for you. Do there is, let's just kind of zoom in there a little bit, and let's do something really cool. Well, I don't know if it's cool. We're just gonna try it. So let's say back to 3, and we'll do a fast curve. Let's just hear how these things sound. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to give a little bit more emphasis back to the vocal, because the vocal is the only thing that's kind of popping out when I reduce the sides information. So you notice, yeah, I'm making the pads quieter. I'm essentially affecting your mix, and you can tell me, hey, no, don't do this. I love the width, all the things that I've done mix-wise. We don't need that. But I want you to pay attention to the contrast that it creates, because it's helping the song bring the vocal to the front just a little bit. I'm not doing major moves. These are very subtle things. So let me play it one more time for you. So we could make that a slow curve. I feel like right there, maybe I want to bring it back down just a tad. And maybe you'll agree with me. And yeah, definitely, thanks for the chat. I don't know why the comments aren't working. Hopefully somebody else, if anybody else has any questions, let me know if the comments aren't working. Maybe you can just private message me. In fact, yeah, just reach out. If you guys have any questions, I'm here for you guys. This is live right now. So feel free to ask your questions while I'm here, because after the live stream, I can have to go do other stuff. But yeah, I love the way that it pulls attention to the drop. And that's exactly what I want to help you with. Is I want to help the song tell the story. So these are the things that I'm kind of paying attention to. And if we do this massage just ever so slightly here, I feel like maybe about halfway, right? About that mark. So right here is another cool part to kind of accentuate all of those beautiful I'll reset that node there. Beautiful ARPs and pad stuff that you've got going on there. I might even boost it just a little there. Say 4. Okay, but the other thing that I want to do is, maybe not in this one, huh? Yeah, might be able to in here. So I am turning off the right mode there. I'm turning on the right mode here. And I maybe just want to play with the unsub. Let's bring that all the way up to like maybe 43. You know what? That's not what we want. We want unboom. Why? And because if I go and do this, and you see that cut, right about 80 hertz. Just want to play with your gain structure on the track ever so slightly. I'm going to undo that because it was already writing. Okay, so Andy actually had a question. Sorry, I'm reading on the other screen here. Bear with me for a moment. Wondering if you might be able to talk about what things a master should accomplish in a very broad sense. I know that this seems articles just say trust your ear, do it until it sounds good, which doesn't give a lot of guidance when it comes to building mastering chains. And really, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that is part of the game is practice and experience. But as I was walking you guys through the chain, I was kind of giving you guys the idea of what I'm after. Part of that is tonal balance, meaning if I'm looking at things, because I can't really trust that any playback system is perfect, I always want to make sure that what I'm hearing correlates also to what I'm seeing with tools like Voxengo Span, tonal loudness, the Uline loudness meter. You know, like this one here is a really cool and quick way of viewing the overall tonal balance of the track. So if I went and play this really quick from the chorus. I'm listening for things like what the mix is already doing well in terms of like, okay, you've kind of leaned into this very vocal-centric track, and there's this presence with the bass. You've got these beautiful arps. What's the story of the song? What's the movement behind each of these arrangement parts in sections of the track? I'm listening for things like that. And then if you notice here, the visuals, I wanted to confirm, okay, if I'm going to sculpt this mix, does it need more bass or less bass? If it's anywhere above these lines, that's where I start to question, is it suffocating the track? Because what'll happen if you throw too much low end in the mix is even when I try to cut that out during mastering, you'll notice that it just turns everything in the sub range down, including your kick, the sub itself. But maybe there's things happening in the mix that, like that balance, that have to do with the way that the rest of the track is structured. So let's talk about this for a second. This talks about, I'm talking about harmony, right? Harmonics relies on the fundamental frequency. So if I looked at your root note of your sub, that's supporting everything else. Now, if you've taken your time to craft this mix, and it really does sound like you have, you've taken the time to sound design your kick so that at least the fundamental is playing in sort of a harmonic relationship with that fundamental frequency. So when your sub is playing that F note, for example, let me go ahead and play it really quick for somewhere like right here. So you notice that one right there is a D2. So I'm just looking at that root note. And that shows us right here, as I'm moving the cursor, you can see what note and then how many cents off that note is. So it's really cool. I love Voxengo Span for this because I can quickly tell whether things are out of key or in key. And things sound like they're playing harmonically. The other thing is, as you push for mastering, let's say you want to push this as loud as possible, right? There's something called squarification. And as you see here, where it says crest factor, and you can see this waveform kind of looks like a diamond, right? That means we're looking at transients, or especially in the sub range, we're looking at how much dynamic room that sub has a peak to sustain relationship. As you push it louder, it squarifies until it's just a brick wall. The problem with that is as you squarify, you actually create overtones, and that those overtones can overtake the fundamental because there's no sine wave left. If it's all square, it kind of just, you know, if you ever heard a pure square wave, it just sounds hollow, right? You've got that perception, that hint of low end, but the rest is just all these overtones. And a true analog setup, if we're talking about just a pure sine wave, or excuse me, a pure square wave that's not being reconstructed in digital, if it's, you know, just true in, you know, acoustic world, there are infinite overtones because of that relationship of, you know, high to low. And digital is always going to be an approximation that's limited by how many like decimal points that calculation can go to. So in 64-bit, that's, you know, some ridiculous number, but still only an approximation, which is why if you look at filters, things like EQs, why people who love analog equipment, analog filters just sound so amazing. You don't hear this stepping or artifacting, the stepping sound between resonant filters as you're dropping the resonance or you're dropping that filter down when you have a high resonance peak. It's very obvious in certain plugins like Serum or things like that, where you can tell it to work in more of an economy mode. Whereas if you tell it to work at 8x or whatever, it's basically upsampling itself. It's working at a higher sample rate and then sampling down to the final mix that you want to output to. But that's basically what's happening. I'm listening for things like that. I'm listening for those final details. And it's very, 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 very hard to train your ears when you haven't heard it until you hear it for the first time. So if you want to listen for things like what mastering is doing, is paying careful attention to extracting that loudness while still kind of creating that perception of impact and things like that. There are a couple of great YouTube tutorials I can show you guys. They're not done by me. Bathymetrics is a really great producer and engineer in his own right. He does a lot of great stuff, and I think I just killed my... I did. Let me just kill that really quick. Sorry, guys. There we go. So, let me use this one here. And go to YouTube. I don't want to watch a video. Where's it going? Yeah. That's my old stuff. Anyway, let's look up bathymetrics. Sub Masterclass is a really good one. So bathymetrics, go check out his channel. He's got a lot of cool stuff. He can explain it. He goes into, it's honestly easily an hour long if you go watch his videos. He's been doing a lot of stuff in Bitwig, but the stuff that he teaches you in terms of this relationship between sub and your kick, mastering deep dive and things like that, I am more than willing to sit down with you guys on. But this deep dive into kick sub phase alignment, this is a master class in how to just nail that kick will hit exactly all the time, depending on several things. Like, it's down to the sound choice itself, and then it's down to sound design, whether you're sidechain ducking or using envelopes to drive automation tools, being very precise, and then paying attention to things like phase between those two. So let's say you have a Serum instance playing a pure sub, and you have to change a setting in there so that it always does the positive part of the sine wave first, because there is elements to Serum that make it sound more analog, but unfortunately that also randomizes the start position of where that envelope, it's going to start drawing that sub waveform. And then there's things that it does to make it sound more analog too, like playing with the symmetry. So a true sine wave just kind of looks like a perfect circle, right, up, and then a perfect circle down. And asymmetry will kind of give it more of that analog-y vibe, but it's kind of throwing it out of that perfect semicircle. And that affects things like the phase relationship with other elements that are playing down that low, like your kick, which might have a very big pulse down that low, and then it's gone. So it's a great master class. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's almost 2 hours long, so be ready to sit down and spend some time with it. But I feel like that might help you just understand what to listen for, because when he does the comparisons and stuff, it's going to be hard. Some people can pick it out really easily on there. Some others on YouTube just have a harder time hearing the difference between the two. So make sure you have a great playback system, or maybe a sub pack. Sub pack would definitely help with that too. So building mastering chains, that's where we're starting to get into more of just, it's all about the art, because everybody's going to have a different approach. There are many, many, many mastering engineers, especially the old school guys. There is a world-class mastering engineer that I met while I was in AES up north through San Francisco chapter. This guy has touched countless records, worked at the plant, and then Sausalito before he started his own business at Coast Mastering in Berkeley. Michael Romanowski is one of the top legends as far as mastering goes out there. In my regards, I know there's plenty of other guys out there like Mayor Applebaum, who is kind of like a waves guy, right? And then there's just countless other guys. Bobcats, that's another guy that's set up several things that I love. For example, K metering, which is basically after Bobcats, special metering for helping with loudness. But for the most part, they would totally be against this setup here because of all of the facts that I'm talking about, like tonal balance and control. The fact that we're introducing filtering. Every crossover point here is going to create a potential for smearing transients. In fact, that is exactly what it's doing. So the perception of impact that the drums are creating, if I were to flip back to this here, let me go back to the drop here. And I just want to A-B between the two chains so you can hear the difference. So you notice that really sharp, it kind of has that clarity. It's really crisp on some of those kicks in your drop. Those hits, those transients aren't being smeared by this chain B, because all of this is, any compression that I'm doing is purely broadband. I am not doing any filtering in a way that's creating phase issues. Whereas up here in this chain, if you look at my L316 and my LinMB, both of these are set up to do a lot of crossover filtering. Every point is introducing phase issues that are causing smearing on those transients. I'm trying to soften those transients on purpose though. I want that sound because I want that broadcast style, smooth, kind of glossy compression, right? And I still get the impact. I get the impression that the drums are doing, and I'm making up for that by the time that I get down here by shaping those transients and putting some sharpness back in, because I'm letting some of those peaks back through. Even though they're kind of smeared, I'm still trying to give them a little time to have that snap, that little peak back up, and before they go into the final stage of Pro L, right? So that's really hard to listen for. It's hard to train your ear for. It just takes practice. It's true, it really does. So I hope that answered your question, because I know this is kind of like, it's still kind of vague. Building mastering chains is still kind of an art, because everything that I've done here is the result of years of honing in on this sound design. And even then, I've heavily modified myself away from this in several recent projects. I'm using almost an entirely different version of this chain. At the core of it, I still have the LinMB and the L316 because I'm doing that pitch and catch method. But a lot of what's in between and at the end might have changed. Some of the common things that you'll see in mastering chains, in fact, usually you want to work this way. You want to work in this direction. Your very end of chain is going to be some sort of limiter, or a dual stage limiter in this case, because I have the Elevate, which is technically a multi-band limiter. In fact, it is a very multi-band limiter. There are many, many, many spots, the filter bank here, and you can see those crossover points. We're doing 26 band. So this is pretty advanced shit, right? Pardon my French. And then the Pro L is just a broadband limiter. And I'm playing with the release characteristics. So hopefully that answered your question. And let me just see if anybody else had any questions really quick. No, I think we're good. Awesome. So as far as making your own chains, you can totally copy this. I have, what DAW are you working in actually? Because I have been working in Ableton. I have a free template I can show you. So if we go to neologicstudios.com, let's just take a look. So if you go to my shop here, I have an Ableton mastering chain template. Right now, these are free. These aren't going to be free forever. I'm actually going to put a price floor on them. I still got to do name your price, but starting at, $5 or $10 or something like that. I don't know yet. I'm still playing around with that. But for right now, it's free for you guys. It's free for everybody, but I definitely might even keep this free for MPA members. This is for Ableton Live with all stock plugins for Ableton 10. So I even have a walkthrough on how this setup, this chain is working. I've tried to recreate the chain that I have here in the broadcast stuff, the dual multi-band setup, as closely as I could. And you'll see I actually worked with a client track on that. So I ended up using that mastering chain for that client's release, which is pretty cool. So you can get commercial sounding stuff with just stock plugins. You don't have to go buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of plugins. It's crazy. Hundreds or thousands of dollars isn't going to get you a crazy, increase in quality. It's going to be a game of inches. That extra 1% difference is literally all we're talking about. So if you want to spend thousands of dollars, if you got thousands of dollars to spend, that's great. But not everybody has that, and you don't need it. And then this is my factory chain with Cakewalk plugins. And again, Cakewalk is this DAW that I'm working with here. So you can grab that one for free as well. I'm trying to work on ones for FL Studio, Cubase, Logic is another one, and trying to get as closely as I can to this setup, as far as what's happening here in this chain. So Ableton, I feel like that chain might help you the most if you're working Ableton. Definitely let me know. In fact, if you guys have any questions on what DAW you would like to see mastering chain set up for, I'm working on them all. Definitely reach out to me. Let me know which ones you're interested in, because I will try to focus on that one first. But back to your track, because I want to get you these masters. So let's dive back in, and let's see if we can just kind of optimize and balance these guys just a bit more. I did all this work in that Waves center tool, right? So I'm going to go to edit, copy special. We're just going to grab that track bus automation, go here to this one and paste special. Alrighty. So now that should also be happening here. So that brings me back to what I was just about to work on Chain B before I hop back over. Sorry, let me go ahead and finish what I was doing here, because you notice I did that bump, right? I did that cut. And I definitely liked it there during the rest. I'm going to exaggerate here so I can show you what I'm kind of leaning toward. And I'm going to dial it back so it's not so exaggerated here. Okay, so I did several things there, and you'll notice put a lot of stuff in the way. Okay, let me get rid of that guy. Just so I can see what's happening there. Upstate, downstate. Okay, so. Oops. Why don't you get rid of you? Where are you at? There we go. Okay. There we go. So just during the rest, I am flipping this guy here to a shelf. And then the other part that's happening here is I started with, you know, just a slight dip. So I am going to emphasize that even more. But I don't need to go quite that far. I don't want it to be drastic, right? So let's move forward a little bit and let's drop that. Maybe about like 5. And I don't want to write to this, but I do want it right about there. So right about where that vocal comes in, I kind of want to start bringing that back, right? So let's go ahead and let's bring him back to maybe 3. Just want to be this nice slow ramp back up there. And then let's go back, and we're just going to jump back to that. Okay, so pay attention to what's happening right same point, we will make that jump back. There we go. That waves definitely need to go back. So right now what I'm doing is trying to optimize just balance between both chains at the same time. Do these little automation moves, right? Very, very subtle. So let's do -0.8. There we go. And we're just gonna bump back. Now we're gonna that. Right up to that drop there, right? And we're just gonna go for it. Let's say 0.6. I'm sorry. Very cool. And it's hard to tell because I think I might be fatiguing my ears a little bit, but it does sound quite a bit pushed in this one. A little harsh, right? So let's just see if we can iron out some of that with I have several versions of Izotope products, so let's just take a look here for mastering. There we go. Now I'm going to put this probably just after, right there. Okay. I feel like I don't really need that kilohertz limiter. I wasn't really impressed by what it was doing. It's very simple, just kind of over protection. Just trying to soften some of the harshness between 6 and 10K there. And this is a lot of information above 10K. I feel like you may be using a lot of saturation, which is good. It's filling out the track. But it's also, when you start to boost the overall signal, things also get sharper. I mean, you tend to accentuate more of the high end. Now think of that squarification I was talking about earlier. As you do that, you're also boosting the highs, because as you limit, you're kind of changing that relationship between low and high frequency information, because as you squarify, like I said, you lose that fundamental. So that's something to be aware of. Anytime you're doing that, that's why we have all these sorts of different limiters that do different things. Things like change that relationship. Like Pro L, you can tell it that style of compression is punchy. So what it's basically doing is paying attention to the transients, and it's kind of looking at the frequency information and focusing on a specific range and emphasizing it over the other. So with that multiband tool, like this is a multiband limiter, you notice I set it to release character drums punched, and I have high degree of separation. If I said that to medium or low, what that just basically says is it widens the crossover points. It says that filtering is a less steep of a roll off, whereas high is very steep, very steep. So yeah, that's just a few things. There's so many things to cover that I can't possibly cover them all. So let me get these rendered out to you. I feel like that was a good way to end the track there. Let me just go back. Maybe that was the best way to do it. Let's go back here. And we're just going to bring that width, that stereo width, back in for the outro. Right, set that to jump. And we will set a bump there, jump. There we go. Okay. Okay. So two very different chains that I'm going to be delivering for you. They have very different feel, a very different sound to them. You'll probably feel very differently about each one, and you're probably going to lean more to one than the other very quickly, and that's okay. But that's why I'm providing two. So hope you love these, Andy. I'm going to get these bounced to you guys. And for anybody who has any questions on mastering, you can reach me at Neologic Studios. I would prefer, if you guys are, since you guys are, this is basically for the Music Producers Alliance, reach out to me through the musicproducersalliance.com. If you have not signed up, hit me up. I will send you a link to the invite so that way you guys can get in. I think we might still be running the special for the membership. So if you guys are not members yet, there are some really cool things that besides this is a one-off. I'm not going to do this all the time, but there are studio hangouts. Like tomorrow we're having one with Nina Wild. She's an amazing producer. In fact, she's got a lot of connections that you guys are going to absolutely freak out about. Definitely check her out. Hers is tomorrow. We've done one with Groove Mechanic. Robert Coster is another guy. Crazy dude. He is building some crazy stuff in Max for Live. So if you guys are Ableton, producers out there, go check out his. But again, watching the replay, I definitely recommend becoming a pro member so you can access all of this amazing content. Because another cool part is that we have weekly, in fact, multiple times a week, we have producer roundtables. So on Wednesdays and Sundays. In fact, I'm usually in a lot of them, helping co-host. I've been pretty busy this last month with some, finishing up some personal obligations. But there are a ton of mentors in the group. There's like 12 of us now, I believe. So definitely go here, check out everybody that's available. I focus more on EDM mastering. I do a little bit of music business and marketing to help new and aspiring artists get started in like just kind of understanding and wrapping their head around building this as a business, what things to consider, things like that. I don't have all the answers, but I know what I know. So if that feels like, we might be a good fit, this is why we have such a huge list of, mentors available. Everybody specializes in something, and we're going to have, the right mentor for you, depending on what you're looking for. I've even done a guest podcast for, if you guys look on Spotify, it's Electronic Dance Money. It's started by Christian Casito of Envious Audio. He's another mastering engineer. In the very first episode, I believe second episode is me and him talking about the importance of mentorship. In fact, I even have a blog article about it, and I've linked that podcast up there as well, so you guys can go check that out anytime. I do have quite a few articles. I just haven't had time to go through and write any more, but you can also find my walkthrough for the Ableton mastering template, as well as the Cakewalk mastering template on my site. Just go to my blog, go to my shop. You can grab those while they're still free. Do it now. And definitely, if you guys want mastering, if you would like me to master your track, you guys can order through Music Producers Alliance. Everything is going to go to me for right now because I am the lead mastering engineer. So I'm super excited to announce that. There are quite a few things under the hood going on in the community. You guys have a member directory where you can reach out directly to other artists and producers. This is a great way to network. So if you guys obviously are coming from the Facebook group, that's another amazing resource available to everybody as well. So yeah, hit me up. I will send you guys a link to join. Right now I have to go grab that and make it available. But yeah, hopefully that answered your guys' questions. Andy, stick around and I will get you the master bounces of those. And until next time, hopefully I'll see you guys in the Music Producers Alliance Facebook group.